Hi, David. I'm Richard.
I know who you are.
Oh, do you?
For over a decade, the world watched Richard Simmons disappear. The man who once filled gyms with energy, transformed lives, and made people laugh until they cried seemed to vanish without explanation. No interviews. No public appearances. No social media. Fans were left desperate for answers. What happened to the legendary fitness icon? Why did he lock himself away? And why, after 10 long years, is the truth finally coming out? Now, for the first time, someone who was with Richard daily, his longtime housekeeper, has revealed the private reality behind the doors he refused to open. According to her, the story is far more complex and heartbreaking than anyone imagined. It's not just about privacy or eccentricity. It's about fear, betrayal, and a deep struggle with the pressures of fame that even Richard Simmons, with all his vitality and warmth, could not escape. She shares chilling details about how Richard's world became increasingly isolated, how even small interactions felt overwhelming, and how the man who once inspired millions now faced his toughest challenge, staying alive in his own home, away from the public eye. While carrying secrets that threatened his emotional health. This is more than a story about a fitness icon fading from view. It's a story of vulnerability, heartbreak, and the human side of someone who seemed invincible. And now, for the first time, the world will see the truth behind Richard Simmons' decade-long disappearance. For anyone who grew up in the 1980s and 1990s, Richard Simmons wasn't just a fitness instructor, he was a force of nature. With his signature short shorts, colorful shirts, and endless energy, he transformed lives in ways most people can't even imagine. Gym-goers and couch-sitters alike would find themselves moving, laughing, and sweating along with him, often without realizing how much they needed more than just exercise. Richard wasn't only shaping bodies. He was shaping hearts, confidence, and self-esteem. Yet, for all the joy he gave the world behind closed doors, his own life was quietly unraveling. For 10 years, Richard Simmons became a ghost to the world. No interviews. No public appearances. No fan events. His absence was felt deeply. People speculated endlessly. Some said he was ill, some said he had been manipulated, others claimed he simply didn't want to be seen anymore. But the truth, according to his longtime housekeeper, was far more heartbreaking than anyone imagined. Those closest to him witnessed a man trapped by fear, guilt, and the crushing pressures of fame. His home, once open and lively, became a fortress. Doors remained closed. Calls went unanswered. Even friends who had known him for decades found themselves turned away. Behind those walls, Richard battled anxiety, depression, and exhaustion that came not from physical exertion, but from the emotional demands of decades spent performing, entertaining, and uplifting others while often neglecting his own needs. His housekeeper recalls days when Richard would speak in whispers, pacing alone, consumed by thoughts the world could never understand. He feared judgment, misunderstanding, and even the weight of adoration that had once fueled him but now suffocated him. Every knock at the door, every phone call, every unexpected visitor became an anxiety he could not manage. Even the people he loved most, friends, colleagues, and family, were kept at a distance, not out of cruelty, but from a desperate need to protect himself from the outside world. During this decade-long absence, Richard was not merely hiding, he was surviving. Survival for him meant controlling his environment, maintaining the few routines that gave him comfort, and holding on to the joy he could still generate privately. The housekeeper remembers how he would sometimes quietly record new exercises or motivational speeches alone, never intending to show them to anyone. These were glimpses of the man he still was, caring, vibrant, and creative, but entirely hidden from the world that once depended on him. Her revelations also suggest that Richard was struggling with more than just isolation. He faced betrayal, manipulation, and emotional exhaustion from the very people who had helped manage his career. She hints at pressures that eroded his trust in those around him, making retreating into the safety of his home the only option that felt safe. What once was a home filled with energy, laughter, and constant movement became a place of silence, where Richard could finally just breathe. The most heartbreaking detail she shares is how he internalized the weight of his absence. Every fan wondering where he had gone, every letter, Every social media post begging him to return. Richard read them, he felt them, but he could not bring himself to respond. His heart ached for the people who loved him, yet the fear of exposure, of judgment, and of losing control over his life was stronger than the desire to appear publicly. This story is a reminder that even the brightest lights can burn out quietly, and even the most energetic, compassionate souls can face battles unseen. Richard Simmons, the man who inspired millions to love themselves, to move their bodies, and to laugh every day, spent a decade fighting for his own peace. His disappearance was not abandonment, it was survival. And now, thanks to those closest to him, the world is finally learning the truth about why Richard Simmons locked himself away for 10 long years, even for someone as exuberant and larger than life as Richard Simmons. Fame can be a double-edged sword. For decades, he poured every ounce of energy into others, encouraging strangers to move, cheering on the insecure, celebrating progress, big and small. Yet the very adoration that fueled him also became a weight he could no longer bear. As his housekeeper describes, Richard's days became a delicate balancing act. He wanted to remain vibrant and joyful, but every public interaction now felt like a storm he could not control. Inside his home, Richard created a world that felt safe. It was a place where he could move freely, where judgment did not exist, and where he could engage with the people and routines he trusted. She explains that he maintained strict schedules, small rituals that reminded him of normalcy, and personal exercises that brought comfort. Even when isolated, he continued to create. Private recordings of workouts and motivational speeches were made daily, a reflection of the man he still was beneath the closed doors, a man who had not lost his passion, only his courage to share it publicly. Richard's retreat was not the result of laziness or disinterest. According to the housekeeper, every day was a struggle. Anxiety gripped him at the thought of leaving home. Fear of judgment, criticism, or exposure consumed him. He worried about the press, fans, and even old friends misrepresenting him. People who once supported him professionally became distant or manipulative, and the housekeeper notes that he became hyper-aware of how others could influence or harm him emotionally. The very world that had celebrated his energy now felt threatening. The emotional toll was immense. Those who visited described Richard as thoughtful, often quiet, but still deeply empathetic. He worried about how his absence affected those who loved him. He read letters from fans, sometimes crying over them, yet never responding. Every note reminded him of the joy he had brought into the world and the pain he now felt by remaining hidden. The dichotomy of wanting to be loved while fearing exposure created a tension that the outside world could not understand. There were moments of vulnerability the housekeeper recalls vividly. Richard would sit in his living room, hands clasped, head bowed, reflecting on what fame had cost him. Not money, not opportunity, not recognition, but intimacy, trust, and peace of mind. He admitted feeling trapped even in a home that he controlled completely. Every visitor, every phone call, every media mention became a potential trigger. He longed to reconnect with the world, but feared the consequences of stepping back into it. Yet, even in isolation, Richard never stopped giving. He continued to think about the people he had inspired, the lives he had changed, and the mission that had always defined him, helping others become healthier, happier, and more confident. The housekeeper recalls times when he would rehearse motivational speeches in private, not for fame, but for the satisfaction of knowing he was still capable of inspiring, even if only in small private ways. Richard's decade-long absence is a reminder of the unseen battles that even the most energetic, compassionate figures endure. Behind the laughter and the cheers, he wrestled with fear, distrust, and the emotional cost of fame. For 10 years, he prioritized survival over visibility, health over attention, and personal peace over public approval. And now, through the insights of those closest to him, the world can finally understand that his disappearance was not abandonment. It was the fight of a man trying to reclaim himself, step by step. In the sanctuary of his own home, the story of Richard Simmons' decade-long seclusion is not just about isolation, it's about fear, heartbreak, and a man overwhelmed by the very love that once defined him. His housekeeper recalls that the pressures he carried were both external and internal. Externally, the public expected him to be ever energetic, always smiling, endlessly giving. Internally, he felt guilt and guilt over the friendships that had strained. Disappointment at missed opportunities to be truly present for his family, and a persistent anxiety that he could never meet the expectations of the world. Again, even simple interactions became unbearable. Richard's housekeeper explains that he avoided phone calls, delayed emails, and carefully filtered who could enter his home. For him, the outside world had become unpredictable and dangerous. The man who once leapt into gyms to encourage strangers now struggled to leave his own front porch. Every interaction felt like a test he was unprepared to pass. Fear had overtaken the very enthusiasm that had made him a household name. She also shares that Richard's mental and emotional state was fragile. He experienced anxiety attacks and bouts of deep sadness. He sometimes paced his living room for hours, thinking through his past, his choices, and the life he had led. The laughter and joy he had offered the world were now private commodities, moments that he could generate but not share. And even though he remained physically active, walking, exercising, and practicing his routines, the mental toll of fame and expectation had become nearly unbearable. Yet, despite these struggles, Richard Simmons never lost his empathy. He remained intensely aware of the people he had inspired. The housekeeper recalls countless evenings when he would read letters from fans, often crying quietly, imagining their struggles and triumphs. While he could no longer meet them in person, he still felt their pain and joy as if it were his own. In many ways, his absence from the public eye was not selfish. It was a way to preserve himself so he could continue caring privately. She also describes the heartbreak of trust lost. Over the years, Richard confided in managers, assistants, and close acquaintances only to find that some took advantage of his generosity. The betrayals were subtle but cumulative, creating a profound sense of caution. Closing the doors of his home became not just a choice, but a necessity. It was a sanctuary from manipulation, gossip, and the relentless scrutiny that comes with fame. For someone who gave everything to the world, learning to protect himself was both painful and essential. Even so, the housekeeper insists that Richard's isolation was not permanent despair, it was recovery. He used those 10 years to reflect, rebuild boundaries, and rediscover small joys in private life. He focused on his health, his routine, and the simple pleasures of living without the constant glare of the public eye. Those closest to him saw glimmers of the man who had once energized millions but now in smaller, quieter ways, a private joy rather than a public performance. The decade Richard Simmons spent behind closed doors is a powerful reminder that even the brightest personalities can be deeply vulnerable. Fame, love, and adoration can sometimes be suffocating. And even those who seem invincible must retreat to protect themselves. For Richard, locking himself away was not an act of hiding, it was an act of survival. A necessary step to preserve his mental and emotional health while remaining true to the man he had always been. Beneath the colorful shirts, smiles, and boundless energy. The final years of Richard Simmons' seclusion reveal something profound about resilience, self-preservation, and the cost of being larger than life. According to his housekeeper, the last phase of his decade-long isolation was a time of quiet reflection, self-discovery, and preparation for the rare moments when he would engage with the outside world again. Behind closed doors, he learned that protecting his peace was not selfish, it was essential to surviving the fame that had once defined him. Even in isolation, Richard remained active in small, meaningful ways. He recorded private videos, developed new fitness routines, and sometimes even rehearsed motivational speeches not for the public, not for media attention, but for himself and the people he loved. These private acts of generosity and creativity were a lifeline, a reminder that he could still give without being drained. The housekeeper explains that he often laughed quietly to himself, remembering the joy he had once spread to millions, and found comfort in knowing that his spirit remained intact. Even if the world could not see it, perhaps the most touching revelation is the depth of his empathy. Despite living alone for 10 years, he never stopped thinking about the people whose lives he had touched. Letters from fans, notes from those who remembered his kindness, and messages of encouragement were read and cherished in solitude. He mourned not only the lives he had influenced, but also the opportunities he had missed to connect more deeply with friends and family. Every unopened letter, every unanswered phone call, was a reminder of both his impact and the isolation he had chosen to protect himself. The housekeeper also shares that Richard's final years of seclusion were marked by moments of courage. He began to rebuild trust with a few close people, inviting them carefully into his life. He started speaking slowly about what had caused his withdrawal, his anxiety, his exhaustion, and the emotional toll of fame. These conversations, private and intentional, were Richard reclaiming his life. He discovered that he could live authentically without the constant gaze of the public. And that true connection did not require an audience. Even more remarkably, the housekeeper reveals that Richard used these years to redefine what it meant to be alive. The man who once measured success in laughter and applause now measured it in peace, health, and meaningful relationships. He learned to say no, to set boundaries, and to recognize that protecting oneself does not diminish the impact one has had on the world. In doing so, he found freedom in ways that fame could never provide. By the end of his seclusion, Richard Simmons had achieved something few understand. He had survived the pressures of celebrity while retaining his spirit, creativity, and kindness. He learned that stepping away does not mean giving up. It means valuing one's life, boundaries, and emotional health above the endless demands of the world. For 10 years, Richard hid, but he also healed, reflected, and preserved the very essence of the man the world adored. The story shared by his housekeeper is a powerful reminder that even the most joyful and giving people carry struggles unseen. Richard Simmons' disappearance was not an act of rejection, it was an act of survival. It shows the human side of a legend, the cost of caring too much for others, and the courage it takes to protect oneself when the world expects constant energy and presence. And now, after years of silence, the world can finally understand the man behind the colorful shirts, boundless energy, and iconic smile, a human being who needed time, solitude, and compassion to find his way back to peace.